Good afternoon. A live look at Parliament Hill, where in just a few minutes, residents, families, workers, and businesses in this country will learn what the government is promising and how it plans to spend your tax dollars. Coming up too soon, 3:45 from 299 Queen Street West. This is Toronto's breaking news, CP24. Hello, I'm Christina Tenalia, and welcome to our special coverage of the 2023 federal budget. And all eyes will be on Prime Minister Justin Trudeau and Finance Minister Chrystia Freeland as they get set to reveal their fiscal blueprint for Canada. Live look here in Ottawa at this hour. So, inflation, housing, healthcare, and the rising cost of living. Just some of the issues that impact everyone's day-to-day lives. And we will see them in just a few minutes. We will see what it is the government is going to announce as the Prime Minister and the Finance Minister make their walk to the House of Commons, where the budget will be delivered at 4 o'clock. Okay, let's talk about what we know so far. We already know one of the items in the budget. CTV News confirms it will include a one-time grocery rebate for some Canadians. It will be available to people with lower incomes who may be struggling with the rising cost of food. The new measure could be available to nearly 11 million lower-income Canadians. Eligible couples with 2 children would receive a payment of up to $467. A senior would receive $225, while a single person would receive $234. Now, here in Toronto, one of the big issues making headlines, particularly across the GTA, is the rising violence on the TTC. Just this weekend, a 16-year-old boy was fatally stabbed in an apparent unprovoked attack at Keele Station on Saturday night. This has prompted reaction from politicians from all levels of government, with Toronto's deputy mayor and the chair of the TTC saying Ottawa needs to provide funding to manage refugees in the shelter system so Toronto can help residents who need shelter and space. We'll talk about this. Joining us live to discuss the issues and help break down the numbers this afternoon is our expert political panel. Let's start. That is right to left, left to right, right to left. Here we go. Adrian Batra, editor-in-chief of the Toronto Sun. Adrian, great to have you here. Kim Wright, NDP strategist with Wright Strategies. Hello, Kim. And Scott Reid, CTV's political analyst and principal at Feshik, Reid and senior advisor to Prime Minister Paul Martin. Thank you so much, everyone, for being here. I want to start, we'll go this way, about this grocery rebate. We don't know who's eligible for it yet, Adrian. We just know low-income Canadians. So who qualifies? Because middle-class Canadians are struggling as well.
Yeah, that's always with a budget. You need to see that the devil's always going to be in the details. So it's nice that they leaked out this aspect of a rebate coming back. We know that Canadians are suffering and struggling each and every day between making choices between heating and eating. That is an ongoing issue, and it's not going to wane anytime soon. So maybe they're going to get some of their own money back, but who does qualify? How does it work? And then on the other hand, we're going to see other taxes increase. So at the end of all of this, this political document may just be simply a wash for Canadians, or even may end up seeing more of their money going out of their pocket.
Mm-hmm. And Kim, a similar question here. I mean, so many people we chat with in the Greater Toronto area tell us that they're struggling when it comes to grocery prices. This is not a new issue. It's something we've been talking about for months. One of the things we've been chatting with some of the people, some pundits throughout the day, and even NDP leader Jagmeet Singh is the government politicizing grocery prices? But I mean, don't they have to in some capacity? I mean, someone's got to help out the average Canadian.
Absolutely. And what we saw a couple of weeks ago when Galen Weston and others have been hauled in front of parliamentary committees has been lots of these types of questions. Jagmeet Singh and the New Democrats had stacks of questions from Canadians that were, what are you doing about inflation? What are you doing about grocery prices? You know, and I'll just give you an example in my own life. Going to the grocery store a year ago to current, potatoes are probably about 20 to 25% more than they were a year ago. People are feeling those on essential items. Mm-hmm. These aren't luxury goods. Yeah. These are essential items to feed their families. And this is why Jagmeet Singh and the New Democrats in particular have taken this supply agreement and said, these are the things that matter to Canadians. This is what parliamentarians were sent back to deal with. This is what we're going to deal with, things that matter to people, not some of the fancy policy stuff, but the meat and potatoes, if you will, of those issues.
No pun intended.
All puns intended.
I heard you chuckle there when I was asking him about this. I mean, is it not the government's role to do something to rein in, let's say, rein in these food prices? I mean, when we had this recent committee with the CEOs of all these major grocers come in, they said, look, we're not, it's not greedflation here, is what they were saying, but people across the country don't necessarily buy that.
You can do one of three things, right? Or I suppose a combination of them. One, you can pursue a bunch of policies at a macro level that are arcane and impossible to communicate, like we're doing, right? Okay, well, the Bank of Canada is doing this. Try to beat down inflation that eventually is going to drop down prices and things will ease. That's the path we're on. You can also try to provide people with a little bit of relief. That's what they're doing. And we do know who it's going to go to. It's going to go to 11 million people, because if you get the GST, HST rebate, you're going to get it. It's means tested. It's really driven toward the lower end of the income scale. But that's where this government has been, right? On income, inflation relief. It said, look, we want to focus on those who need it most. So you can have an argument about that, the politics of that. Do the middle class feel like they're left out? Or is that necessary because otherwise we're fueling inflation? And then the third thing you can do is, like a great big hammer of government. You could come in and say, well, we're going to actually start regulating food prices. I don't know that even the NDP have called for that. I don't think that we run and we'll go down that road. Like, that's a thorny patch. And we might find ourselves, 11 months from now, finding that, in fact, inflation has decreased. Therefore, the pressure on prices has eased. And yet you got this sort of, regulation in a government. I mean, who would do it? You would have a committee that would identify prices. So I don't think we're going to go down that way. It's not war years. We're not going to ration sugar and butter and that sort of thing. And but, there's no doubt people are feeling the heat. That's why they're going to talk about, this, and they're going to rebrand it as a grocery rebate to try to say to people, we're responding to this pain. Because a lot of folks, Kim talks about potatoes. I mean, that's 87% of my daily diet. So this matters.
And you make a great point when I said who qualifies. We know it's 11 million people. I guess I meant from an income perspective in terms of how much you make per year. So that's about a quarter of the country. I want to play a clip for you and bring it back to the city for just a moment. And we'll ensure you can hear this clip. So this is yesterday. Toronto Deputy Mayor Jennifer McKelvey and TTC Chair John Burnside commenting on the murder of a 16-year-old along the subway system, like on TTC property. And this is the fourth murder in less than a year, either on TTC property or close to it. So I want you to hear what the Deputy Mayor and the TTC Chair had to say yesterday.
I'm hopeful in particular around the refugee shelters. That is something that the city's very committed to welcoming people, but we do need the federal government's help. I'm hopeful in many respects that they're going to be helping us with some of the financial challenges that the city is also facing. In particular, we do have decreased ridership on the TTC, and that means that in a city that's so highly dependent on the fare box, we're having financial challenges.
The province has been great in terms of the money that they've put towards mental health in the last budget. But we also have a third of our shelter system with refugees. Where's the federal government? Where are all our MPs that are representing the people of Toronto? Where are they stepping up and saying, hey, we forget the $250 million or whatever, however many millions of dollars they owe us for that. We need help. We need them to find space. We need them to provide workers for the shelters so that we can help other Torontonians that need shelter and space. So this is going to have to be not a TTC issue. This is a citywide issue. This is a provincial issue. This is a national issue. And everyone's looking at the TTC, and we're ready, but we need partners. And I'm looking at the federal government to do a lot more.
Okay, Adrian, I want to start with you. You used to work in the mayor's office under former late Mayor Rob Ford. So I had to take a close listen to this. What TTC Chair John Burnside is suggesting is that newcomers to this country are in the shelter system. So that means perhaps, I think this is what I'm extrapolating from what he's saying, those with mental health issues don't have space in the shelter system. And he's saying we need help from the federal government on this. When I heard that, I felt it was a bit of a reach.
Well, I think what he's trying, I'm not going to speak for John Burnside, but I'll parse through what he was attempting to, maybe clumsily trying to say, is we do have a reality of refugees in the city of Toronto, for example. Those spaces are being occupied. So when there are other legitimate mental health challenges, they have nowhere to go. Part of what we need to go back is look at the pandemic. The subway system became a refuge for people. People were living there. Some are still living there.
Sometimes, though, that is by choice. I mean,
that
in
is
the
by
sense
choice.
that
I mean, we can't.
Some people don't want to go in the shelter system. Yes.
But I want to be very clear about one thing with respect to this latest murder on the TTC. The perpetrator in this case, there's no suggestion he had mental health issues. He was out on bail. But the broader issue is there are very legitimate mental health concerns and challenges that the subway system, that everywhere in Toronto is trying to contend with. So regardless of what Mr. Burnside was trying to say, I think what he's suggesting is the federal government has a role in being part of the funding process and dealing with the issues of growing refugees, where then at the municipal level they can manage the healthcare expectations when it comes to mental health.
Okay,
I mean, I think that's what he's trying to say.
Thank you for breaking that down. And today, the Ford government announcing again their an somewhat immigration announcement, because they're trying to attract more skilled workers. Scott, I want to put this to you for a second here. We don't expect any funding today. I mean, at least I don't think, in the budget when it comes to helping this challenge that the deputy mayor and the TTC chair are speaking to.
Certainly, it's not been previewed. Look. I don't know why we're picking on just refugees. Like, I think it's a much broader issue than that. The reality is this: Toronto's different. Like, it's fundamentally different. We talk about raising immigration levels. We talk about mental health challenges. We talk about homeless challenges. Those are almost overwhelming. We think about it from a national perspective. Those things are overwhelmingly concentrated here in Toronto and the GTA. So, yeah, post-pandemic and probably even somewhat before the pandemic, the TTC's become a moving homeless shelter. It's become a moving mental health shelter. I look at it and I say, when this mayor's race kicks off, I'll be interested to see if from both the provincial and the federal level, you're going to see demands from those candidates to say, you know what, we need a flat-out new deal. Because, if Toronto's going to be asked to take on 50, 60, 75% of the burden of these social infrastructure costs that we're actually having across the country, then there actually needs to be some disproportionate recognition of that, whether it's new funding mechanisms or it's enriched funding mechanisms. I mean, there's some politics going on there. John Burnside said, hey, the province is there 100,
he did say that,
100p, right? But, it's the federal government. You know what? On all levels of government, we're going to have to say, do we need to take a look at this differently? Structurally, this isn't working. It's not working in terms of crime. It's not working in terms of TTC, not working in terms of homelessness, not working in terms of social infrastructure. We got to recognize that this city is bursting at the seams. We got to do it different.
And Kim, as you know, the NDP perspective here on the panel, I mean, we have heard from even some conservative-leaning mayoral candidates who, are making suggestions. Let's say, don't defund policing, that policing is the answer. We know this is a crisis that is greater than that, and it involves mental health challenges. It is such a complex issue. And again, we don't expect to see, as Scott noted, there's at least no hints that there'll be anything in the budget today that speaks to this. But it seems like people toss around solutions, but no one has an answer, or toss around ideas.
They toss around headlines, they toss around sound bites. But let's be very clear about something. The challenges with refugee settlement claims and refugee settlement funding has been a problem for at least the last 20 years that I've been covering Toronto City Hall and in politics in Toronto. This has always been a major big ticket item in the City of Toronto budget that has never been backfilled by the feds or the provinces. There's been a lot of, we might get to that. Maybe if you do an audit, maybe if you do a this or a that, or can we just come to the ribbon cutting? And they've always been left holding the bag. And Adrienne can tell you that from her time at City Hall. But I have looked at City of Toronto budgets for the last 17 years. This has always been a problem. And the federal government has gotten away with it year after year. And there will be no money today. There will be lots of conversations about we closed Roxham Road and we're doing all of these things. And Canada is a generous place to welcome people. And it is, except for municipalities continue to be left holding the bag. Now, the press conference from Deputy Mayor McKelvey and the chair of the TTC didn't recognize the realities that are on the ground, both in the shelter and supportive housing system and in other places. Yes, there is funding that needs to be put into those mechanisms. We need to lift the COVID restrictions on our shelters to allow more beds in the system. We need to get at a whole bunch of complex problems. The city has some resources. The TTC has resources. They've got millions earmarked for safety measures. There was clearly money in the budget for IT issues and all sorts of other resources. What I will look to today from the feds, what I looked to last week from the province, and I looked for the City of Toronto, is a budget as an opportunity to show people your values. And what I'm not seeing is that they're valuing the safety of Torontonians.
Okay, well, we're going to pause for a moment. This is The Walk, as we call it. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau and Deputy Prime Minister and Finance Minister Chrystia Freeland. We're going to listen in a moment.
For a solid future with a growing economy. C'est un plan pour aider les Canadiens avec le coût de la vie. C'est un plan pour aider avec les soins dentaires et les soins de la santé. Et c'est un plan pour faire croître la classe moyenne dans un avenir positif et croissant.
Évidemment la réalité, Monsieur le Premier ministre, et j'ajouterais juste que notre plan pour la croissance pour la classe moyenne, c'est de le faire en bâtir l'économie propre du XXIe siècle. Our plan for building the middle class and creating great middle class jobs is to build a clean economy in the 21st century.
Thank you very much.
Reining in on past spending that was pandemic specific.
So one of the things that we hear from the finance minister quite regularly is that they're going to be fiscally prudent and that they're going to look at cutting out extraneous spending and things like that. But that actually hasn't borne out. We actually haven't seen that. And we are expecting taxes to increase today as well in different areas. So that's more money that the federal government will be taking into their coffers. But I think you're going to hear a lot of discussion about affordability. And that goes back to what we were talking about earlier with respect to the grocery prices and this rebate that's going to be announced. I think you're going to hear a very typical language that you hear from a government that is in a scandal, needs a day or two of reprieve from the ongoing election interference scandal. So you're going to hear things that are they feel would be directed towards Canadians that they think, okay, I can still support this government because they're looking out for me. But what does that look like? What does that actually entail? We've all just finished talking about arguably one of the biggest issues going on in the biggest city in this country, the heartbeat of this province, and we're not going to see any financing for that. So each Canadian's unique and has their own challenges. Government can't fix everything, and this budget shouldn't attempt to try to fix anything, but there should be some recognition and acknowledgement that their spending has contributed to inflation.
I want to talk about things that catch people's attention. Scott, I'll put this to you. You know, these junk fees that we expect to hear about, you know, extra fees on your cell phone. I mean, that's stuff that irks the average Canadian. Sure. It really does. Any sense of what we might hear from that end? I mean, you know, if you go to the grocery store and you buy a bit of fruit that's prepared, are you still going to have to pay the food preparation fee? Is it like, well, what are these fees? Because people are looking to save where they can.
So as part of an effort to say, hey, we get it. We get the burden you're feeling in terms of increasing costs and getting nickel and dimed here and there. I'm sure they're going to say, we're going to like put those things right between the crosshairs. We're going to go after them. But the truth of the matter is that what they're going to announce is a process, right? Because they're going to have to work with provinces. They're going to have to work with, sometimes they have to work actually with industry because that's where these levies are actually executed. And so they'll have to do a bunch of that. I think one of the things that's interesting is the government so far in terms of the tone and message about this budget, and we'll see as they present it, they've been in competition with themselves. You know, you got the finance minister talking about fiscal restraint, which feels like a little bit of a, you know, cough, cough, laugh, laugh. Then you've got the prime minister talking about the need to respond to the cost of living crisis that people are feeling. Okay, we're going to see some measures there. And then the other thing, of course, is, you know, and I think what might make this the more consequential as a budget, might be less sexy, I think you're going to see massive amounts of investment, like so-called old-style industrial strategy. We're going to put money into drawing manufacturing here. And I think that makes sense. I would hammer on that nonstop. Talk about jobs, talk about growth. Borrow a page from Biden's book when he was here last week, and he said, we're going to be building plants here, like VW. So Oakville, St. Thomas, Windsor, we're going to start opening plants when we used to be in the business of closing them, and we're going to talk about jobs. But I'm not sure what the balance they're going to strike is, because they want to talk about 4 or 5 things and say, oh, by the way, this is all very buttoned down and fiscally responsible.
So last week, President Biden referred to his Inflation Reduction Act, the IRA. We're going to have to listen. We'll get back to that comment in a moment. Here's Finance Minister Chrystia Freeland.
I'd like to table in both official languages the 2023 budget documents, including notices of Ways and Means motions.
Details of the measures are contained in these documents. Pursuant to Standing Order 83-2, I'm requesting that an order of the day be designated for consideration of these motions. Seems a good idea, right? Mr. Speaker, Canada's economy has made a remarkable recovery from the COVID recession. Last year, Canada delivered the strongest economic growth in the G7. There are 830,000 more Canadians working today than when COVID first hit. We have recovered 126% of the jobs that were lost in those first months, compared to just 114% in the United States. When we announced a Canada-wide system of affordable early learning and childcare in our 2021 budget, we said that it would create new economic opportunities for mothers all across Canada, and thus greater prosperity for all of us. And you know what, Mr. Speaker? It worked. I am so proud to say that last month, the labor force participation rate for Canadian women in their prime working years hit a record high of 85.4%. That's feminist economic policy, Mr. Speaker. It works. So today, Mr. Speaker, there are more Canadians with good jobs than ever before.
Putin and the pandemic have driven up inflation all over the world. The central banks reacted by launching one of the swiftest and most synchronized cycles of monetary tightening since the 1980s. And today, in Canada, inflation is going down. The inflation rate has been dropping for 8 months in a row, sitting at 5.2% in February. The Bank of Canada expects it to fall to just 2.6% by the end of the year. In February, Canadians' average hourly wages rose by 5.4%, so paychecks grew by more than inflation. This means Canadians from coast to coast have more money in their pocket at the end of the workday. However, we all know our more vulnerable friends and neighbors are still suffering from higher prices. That's why our budget contains targeted, temporary relief from the effects of inflation for those who need it. For 11 million Canadians and Canadian families, the new grocery rebate will help offset higher prices without fueling inflation. Because what all Canadians want right now is for inflation to keep going down and interest rates along with it. That's why the budget I've tabled today will enable Canada to remain the country with the lowest debt to GDP ratio in the G7. We are seeing to it that the wealthiest Canadians and large corporations pay their fair share of tax, so that we can keep taxes lower for middle-class families and invest in our healthcare system and our social safety net.
Canada is a country of peace, order, and good government. We have strong institutions and a resilient financial system that is the envy of the world. Our country has a proud tradition of fiscal responsibility. That is a tradition we are determined to uphold. We are refocusing government spending while taking great care not to reduce the services and direct support that Canadians rely on. By exercising fiscal restraint, we're ensuring that we can continue to invest in Canadians and in the Canadian economy for years to come, just as we have done since 2015. Because we know that investments in Canadians are also investments in our economy. This is what the U.S. Secretary of the Treasury, Janet Yellen, has referred to as modern supply-side economics. Nous investissons dans le logement.
We're investing in housing because our economy is built on people, and people need a roof over their head. We are investing so that Canadian workers can acquire the skills they need and get to where the jobs are. We're investing to strengthen the immigration system, and we're bringing a record number of skilled workers to Canada to support our booming businesses. And we're investing in affordable childcare from coast to coast to coast, so that more Canadians no longer have to choose between family and career. Investing in housing, skills, and immigration and childcare isn't just social policy, it's economic policy too, Mr. Speaker. The same thing goes for healthcare. So today, we are delivering the overall investment of $198 billion in our public health care system, which the Prime Minister announced just last month.
From helping every single Canadian find a family doctor, to tackling the unacceptable backlog of surgeries, to combating the opioid crisis that has devastated so many of our families and our communities, that has taken so many lives. We will ensure that Canadians receive the care they need. We will ensure that every single Canadian can rely on a world-class, publicly funded, universal health care system, one that is deserving of its place at the very heart of what it means to be Canadian. And just as we are reinforcing the public health care system we have today, we are also expanding its reach. Since December, our investments have helped more than 240,000 Canadian children receive the dental care they need. Just think about that, 240,000 Canadian kids. Maybe their parents couldn't take them to the dentist before. Maybe their teeth hurt. Maybe they missed days at school. It's so important. And that's why today I am so proud to announce the creation of a new Canadian dental care plan. By the end of this year, by the end of 2023, we will begin rolling out a dental care plan that will eventually cover up to 9 million uninsured Canadians. This will mean that no Canadian ever again will need to choose between taking care of their teeth and paying the bills at the end of the month. It will mean you can't tell the size of someone's paycheck by their smile. These are significant and necessary investments, Mr. Speaker, because a strong and effective public health care system is essential for a strong and healthy Canadian workforce. And we need a strong and healthy Canadian workforce now, more than ever. Because as we wrestle inflation to the ground, Canada must also navigate two fundamental shifts in the global economy. First, in what is the most significant economic transformation since the Industrial Revolution, our friends and partners around the world, chief among them, the United States, are investing heavily to build clean economies and the net zero industries of tomorrow. At the same time, Putin and the pandemic have cruelly revealed to the world's democracies the risks of economic reliance on dictatorships. As a result, our allies are moving quickly to friendshore their economies and build their critical supply chains through democracies like our own. Together, these two great shifts represent the most significant opportunity for Canadian workers in the lifetime of anyone here today. Including our most senior and respected members of this House. Absolutely. Now, this is not hyperbole, Mr. Speaker, or mere turn of phrase. When President von der Leyen stood in this House earlier this month, she said that she wants Canada and Europe to join forces for the climate, for our economies, and to end what she called Europe's dangerous dependencies on authoritarian economies. When President Biden stood in this House just last week, he told us that we are at an inflection point in history. He said that we had all learned the hard way that just-in-time global supply chains make us vulnerable. And he urged us to work together to build a shared future where Canada and the United States can anchor the most competitive, prosperous, and resilient economic region in the world.
Yep.
These are our closest friends, Mr. Speaker. These are our steadfast democratic allies. These are our two greatest trading partners. And like so many of our friends around the world, they need the expertise of Canadian workers, the ingenuity of Canadian businesses, and the resources that Canada has in such fortunate abundance. Aujourd'hui,
Today, and in the years to come, Canada has to seize this historic moment, this amazing opportunity we have, or else we'll get left behind as the rest of the world's democracies build the clean economy of the 21st century. So, we are going to fight for Canadians and Canadian companies. We will make sure Canada seizes this historic opportunity. We are building a clean electric grid accessible to all Canadians from coast to coast to coast, which will protect the environment and provide Canadians and Canadian companies with clean, affordable electricity. We are making Canada the best place in the world.
Okay, Finance Minister Chrystia Freeland tabling the budget. Let's pivot to NDP leader Jagmeet Singh with his reaction.
To tackle the climate crisis only if there's guarantees for good wages, good pay, and support for union jobs. Like, that's something that's never been done before, and we're proud of that. We're also, on a number of areas, not satisfied that this government hasn't responded to the urgency of the housing crisis, that they haven't put in place changes to EI, given that we're up against a recession. So there's things that we're not satisfied by, but we're very proud of the work that we've been able to do.
So are you going to be supporting this budget is the big question.
Yes, we'll be supporting the budget. We're going to be supporting the expansion of dental care. We're going to be supporting giving people some money back in their pockets, helping them save money. We're going to be supporting the good wages tied to investments. We're going to be supporting the relief that Canadians deserve and that we force this government to deliver. En français. Oui, on va appuyer ce budget parce qu'on a élargir les soins dentaires pour inclure nos aînés et les enfants de moins de 18 ans et les gens qui vivent avec un handicap. On a maintenant on a forcé le gouvernement de continuer doubler le crédit de la TPS, ça va mettre plus d'argent dans les poches des gens.
Okay, we want to break down some of the nuggets in this budget. So we're going to present to you a report from one of our CTV News reporters in Ottawa. They were in the budget lockup, and now that, of course, the budget has been tabled, we can share with you some of the details. And then we'll circle back with our panel. Let's listen in.
Touted as a made-in-Canada plan at a time of great economic uncertainty, the federal budget proposes nearly $70 billion in new spending over 6 years, offset by about $25 billion in cuts and tax savings. Together, the plan raises Canada's deficit to $40.1 billion next year, up from a projected $30.6 billion, with no path to balance. The government is prioritizing the shift to clean tech, offering $80 billion in investments over the next 10 years. Ottawa sees this as a way to counter the massive green infrastructure investments offered in the Biden administration's Inflation Reduction Act. The energy transition is one of the biggest budget items and includes a 15% tax credit to build out the supply of green energy, a cost of $6.3 billion over 4 years, and a 30% credit for investment in clean technology manufacturing at a cost of $4.5 billion over 5 years. For the first time, these tax credits will be offered to Crown corporations and public utilities. Another area of priority, the affordability crisis. To help combat inflation, the rising cost of food, the government is increasing the GST credit. The rebranded grocery rebate will provide a one-time maximum payment of $467 per eligible family. The $2.5 billion rebate is expected to benefit 11 million low and modest income Canadians. There are a few other items that will impact consumers too. The planned 6% tax hike on alcohol, set to be implemented on April 1st, is being reduced to 2%. And MasterCard and Visa have agreed to lower interchange fees for small businesses by up to 27%, a deal that's expected to save businesses $1 billion over 5 years. There's also $1.8 billion in new money to help CATSA speed up processing over 5 years. But consumers will have to pay for that, since the air traveler security charge is set to rise to $19.87 on domestic round-trip flights and to $34.42 on international round trips. Another major pillar of this budget, healthcare. $13 billion over 5 years will help create a Canadian dental care plan that will provide coverage to uninsured Canadians with family income less than $90,000 by the end of this year. There's also $22 billion allocated to the government's health transfers to the provinces, $158 million to implement the 988 suicide prevention line, and $827 million over 5 years for Indigenous health priorities. While there are many planned spending programs, the government is also making cuts to spending, especially in the public service. Ottawa has committed to reducing spending on consultants and travel by 15%, saving $7.1 billion over 5 years, and to phasing in a 3% spending reduction across all departments and agencies by 2026-2027, reducing spending by $7 billion over 4 years. In response to current headlines around foreign interference, the government is pledging $13.5 million over 5 years to start a national counter-foreign interference office and $48.9 million over 3 years to the RCMP to help protect diaspora communities from harassment and intimidation. Overall, the budget presents a less rosy picture of Canada's debt and deficit track, with no path to balance and a mild recession predicted this year. Given that picture, many economists say they would have preferred to see a more conservative budget, Omar, with less spending.
Okay, that's CTV's Annie Bergeron-Oliver in Ottawa. Let's take it back to our panel of Scott, Kim, and Adrian. Okay, so Finance Minister Chrystia Freeland cast this $497 billion budget as fiscally responsible. Scott, we were chatting as it was going on. They're trying to rein in spending across some of the federal programs. But in terms of the average Canadian, some of these things like investments in clean energy projects, for example, I mean, does this really speak to the average Canadian, some of the stuff that we're seeing? And is it the government showing that we're trying to rein in spending here?
Well, they're not reining in spending. So I mean,
I'm sorry, sir. They're trying to.
No, but I'm not correcting your math. I'm saying that.
I'm sorry. I guess what I'm trying to say is some of this stuff we see here. Hold on a second. From these notes, they're reviewing government programs, more funds for the Phoenix pay system, money for a more diverse and inclusive public service. The first one, though, off the top here is. The federal budget proposes an across-the-board 3% spending cut for all departments and agencies. Right. I mean, you know, when I think of my friends and my neighbors and they look at that, they're wondering, how does that impact me?
Well, we'll see. I mean, you could get the worst of both worlds. You could get higher spending, but, you know, somewhat diminished resource services. But, you know, my guess is, in terms of striking this precarious balance, they're trying to demonstrate, look, we are actually turning to ourselves and trying to see if we can trim something out of the budget, making certain we're not just spending more and more and more on ourselves in terms of departments, terms of agencies, terms of government itself. So I don't think that that's a stupid thing to do. I think that that makes sense. Also with, you know, outsourcing and consultants and so on and so forth. I think, to be honest with you, the real, you know, the fundamental fiscal truth here is that the debt to GDP ratio is going to rise. It was supposed to fall. Deficit is going to rise. It was supposed to fall. Now, you know, we're also facing a precarious time. We're going to go into a mild recession. Those things cost the Treasury money over time. I really think, to me, the thing that jumps out, you mentioned it, it may not be as sexy to people as HST, GST rebates, but to me, $80 billion over 10 years, trying to keep pace with the United States, who's spending hundreds of billions of dollars in terms of electrification, in terms of new manufacturing. When you ask, what does it mean to real people? Well, it means that we're going to continue to have an auto sector. It's going to be an electric auto sector, but that means that we're going to be in the game on that. And I think it's really important because we can't just say, sorry, we're not going to match the United States when it comes to all the money they're spending through the IRA, the Inflation Reduction Act. We've got to belly up to that bar because that's going to be the future of our literally our economic foundation. Certainly in central Canada, when you think about, you know, this is a new auto pact fundamentally. I mean, that's what we're trying to do. Taking all those jobs that 30 years ago beat their way across the ocean and found themselves in Asia and China. We're taking those things back. We're bringing them to North America. Now they can go to Cleveland or Pennsylvania, or they can come to St. Thomas and Oakville. And $80 billion is, a lot of it's going to end up trying to compete for those jobs and manufacturing.
And that was a huge announcement particularly the Ontario government was really keen on touting that announcement.
They're all in with the feds on this.
In St. Thomas. Want to point out here, so the budget banks unspecified billions for the Volkswagen electric, again, it's a car battery plant, not an electric car plant, in St. Thomas. And Finance Minister Chrystia Freeland says more details will come in the weeks to come. Okay, we're going to just run through. I'll return to you both in a moment. We're going to run through some of the big ticket items here. Nearly $70 billion in new spending over 6 years, $25 billion in cuts and savings, $13 billion over 5 years for the Canadian Dental Care Plan, an increase to the GST credit, which of course has been rebranded as the grocery rebate, which will impact 11 million Canadians, and that provides a maximum one-time payment of $467 to a family of four. $2.5 billion directed, as I noted here, to 11 million people with a lower income. And then this is the 15% clean electricity investment credit tax. Let's go through it here as well. And of course, this was something we saw in the story by Annie Bergeron-Oliver. There is this foreign interference plan that they have. So over 3 years, there is a plan here. I'm just reviewing it here. There is a plan to ensure or try and counter foreign interference. So this is, I want to say this is clearly political, is it not? I mean, the government has been challenged by this issue in the last 2 weeks. This is not something they thought about including in the budget, let's say 3 or 4 months ago.
Likely not, but I mean, every budget is a political document. Right. I mean, that's kind of the whole reason of it in some ways. But the injection of that certainly was something. Well, Scott would certainly know this better than me, but it was definitely scribbled in the last probably week that the federal Liberals have really been on the ropes with respect to the foreign interference.
For more than a week. That's been at least a 3-week
okay,
train wreck.
I'm going to be
nothing to see here whatsoever.
But, you know, the overall tenor of this document, I mean, I think there's a lot I would agree with what Scott has already said. You know, increased spending, it's going up and up and up. Their attempt at saying, oh, we're cutting in terms of travel, oh, great. So Justin Trudeau's not going to stay in a $6,000 a room night anymore. They're going to cut consultant fees. They're the ones that brought that up over nearly $20 million since they took office. So these cuts, these reductions are really just window dressing. The bigger picture spending items on this from this government, from this budget, we're spending more money on servicing our debt, Christina, than we are on health care, on our equalization payments, on this dental program. We're spending more and more to service the debt. That's resources and revenue that are not going to Canadians, or investments in those dollars are not going to Canadians because the increased debt. So you asked the question earlier, what does the average Canadian get to take away from this? Sure, there is an important investment of the electrification of our grid. That is significant. That's why you saw Premier Ford and Prime Minister Trudeau standing shoulder to shoulder to make that VW announcement. But for the average Canadian right now, today, that $427 that they're going to get, or at least 11 million Canadians are going to get, will be ostensibly wiped out when the carbon tax increases on Saturday and the cost of goods rate goes up. All of those savings are wiped out.
I'm going to get to the carbon tax in just a moment. I wanted to clarify, though, the details of that foreign interference. Obviously, I wasn't part of the lockup. I heard it here in Annie Bergeron-Oliver's report. So it is an office to counter foreign interference. It'll give nearly $50 million to the RCMP to combat the harassment of Canadians by powers such as China and Russia. I'll start with you, Scott. Is that money? Well, it sounds like it could be money well spent. But I mean, again, when we take a look at the things Canadians care about, I mean, how much of a concern is this?
Well, I think it's a concern. I mean, I think the people have been talking, not just for weeks in that case, they've been talking for months, maybe 2 years, about these, foreign police stations, that China's running these police stations. That's what they're talking about. So if we're going to say that we want to take action on that kind of thing, sorry, but, the truth of the matter is you're going to have to spend money to do so. So it's that kind of stuff. I mean, those are $40 million announcements. I mean, $40 million is more than I make in a year. I'm not trying to poo-poo it, but in the context of a $497 billion budget, that's not where the big money is going, okay? That's a headline. That's not where the big money. The big money is going to electrification, to clean tech. The big money is going to GST rebates, affordability measures, trying to hold the stem. And I hear what Adrian's saying, but ultimately, we're in a situation where you're trying to keep pace with the United States. The investment it's going to be making and expanding its economy. We're going to be facing a recession. These are not going to be cheap times to be in government. Doesn't matter what party you are.
But the reality is this, Christina. They're spending $40, $50 million on a new office to be created, which 3 weeks ago they said we didn't have a problem. 3 days ago, the government said they didn't have a problem. Now, all of a sudden, they have found that there's a problem. There's also been a problem for 10, 15, 20 years on settlement services. Municipalities are being left holding the bag on that. There isn't the unlocking at CMHC to build new housing, both on purpose-built rentals as well as any other form of housing stock. We have a homelessness problem not only in the city of Toronto, but in every jurisdiction across the country because the federal government has abdicated its responsibility in affordable housing. CMHC has not unlocked the availability of this money to allow for purpose-built rentals or any other form of housing. And you're going to see this more and more. You can create all of the new manufacturing facilities you want, but if there isn't grid capacity and there isn't people living in those communities, the economic well-being of this city this country from coast to coast to coast will not survive. And the reality is, I don't care what you want to call this new office. There's clearly an issue with foreign interference. Canadians deserve to know what that is. But in this billions of dollars that is set aside in the federal budget, they are not looking at how to help people writ large. I am glad to see that Jagmeet Singh and the New Democrats got dental care and have continued to push that. The federal Liberals had promised it and then didn't promise it and then came back because of this deal. There are things around the grocery rebate that I'm quite proud that was part of the agreement. But there are a lot of things that are going to leave a lot of municipalities and Canadians left behind in this budget, and that's a sad day.
I just want to circle back when I was saying to Scott, to Canadians, I mean, we know they care about foreign interference, but $50 million to go toward that. I was reminded of a recent Angus Reid poll that said 2 out of 3 Canadians do believe that Beijing interfered in our most recent election. So it's certainly on the mind of Canadians. I want to circle back on dental care and the sort of expansion, or I should say the progress of this program in the budget. So you're suggesting you're satisfied?
I'm saying it was more than what we were expecting because we were expecting the government to walk away from this. They frequently walk away from lots of promises. We've seen it for years. I'm happy to see it still in the budget. I am certainly want to see more and more expansion of it because whether you are somebody who says, well, I get dental care through my work. What do we need this for? First of all, there are a lot of people in Canada who didn't have access to dental care, and that is healthcare, and oftentimes it is preventative. What we see in our mouths becomes a precursor for what happens in the entire body and over the healthcare system. I think this is important for mental health, and we've seen this. People who need access to dental care who haven't gotten it, and maybe they don't want to go to get those jobs or maybe not have those same opportunities because what's happening in their mouth. So having these access to these types of services, this is one of the biggest influx of money into the Canada landscape of Medicare that we've seen in a very long time. So I'll applaud the government for doing it. Is there always more? Absolutely. Would I have liked to have seen more people covered quicker? Absolutely. But we're getting there. And 2 years ago, before this supply agreement with the New Democrats, we weren't seeing any of it.
Thank you, Kim. Adrian, I want to circle back on the carbon tax, or at least the Conservative priorities. Pierre Poilievre saying today, or I should say Melissa Lantsman, who spoke on CTV News Channel, I know he spoke as well, or she spoke on a number of networks as the deputy leader, asking for the carbon tax increase to stop or be halted. As you noted, it's going to increase on Saturday. The federal Conservatives calling for the tax on alcohol to be reduced. We did see that. But in terms of Conservative priorities, and as expected, not so much.
Well, to Kim's point,
you wouldn't expect it to.
My teeth are starting to hurt by how much spending there is in this budget, so I might need that dental program at some point. But we know it certainly does. Well, look, this budget's going to pass. We're going to see the leader of the NDP support it, as we know that they've made that deal with one another. But just on that issue with respect to the increased taxes, I think that the government clearly listened on the consumption tax or the alcohol tax. There was going to be serious business ramifications for that increase. But with respect to the carbon tax, we're going to see potentially 14 cents a liter per liter of gas go up. And that doesn't include the second carbon tax that is going to be implemented by the Liberal government come the summertime, which won't be benefit, which you can't get a rebate from. So the current carbon tax as it is, though increasing, you can get a rebate. You don't get much back. But that said, another one is on its heels. So again, we talk about affordability. We talk about cost of living. We talk about all of these things with respect to Canadians. This document doesn't address that, nor should it be government's role to address so many of these challenges. But they are spending such an inordinate amount of money, nearly $500 billion budget is what we're looking at now. And you have to step back and think, for the average Canadian, sure, a dental program where you can't afford that will be helpful. But they're taking more of your money on the other end by increasing the carbon tax.
Okay, I'm going to pause our panel for just a moment. Finance Minister Chrystia Freeland is speaking. We're going to go live in the House of Commons. I don't believe she's speaking to reporters. She's still speaking to the House of Commons. Let's listen.
But no one has a crystal ball. And so I just want to conclude by assuring every single Canadian listening to us today, we will always be there for every single Canadian, come what may.
Resuming debate. we go. The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
Que la ministre de l'Inflation
The Minister of Inflation made a statement last year. She said, "Allow me to be very clear, Mr. Speaker. We are absolutely determined to ensure that our debt-to-GDP ratio continues to decrease. We will make sure of that, Mr. Speaker." Here we are, a year later. That was not accomplished. It's interesting because just a few days ago, she admitted that deficits fuel inflation. Today, she's tabling a budget with $43 billion in additional spending that will be paid for through taxes and taxpayers. Conservatives work for those who work, and that's why we will vote against this inflationary plan, Mr. Speaker.
The Finance Minister was telling us only a few days ago that deficit spending would spark even more inflation, higher grocery bills, more expensive housing, and other costs for families. And today, she rolls out a bonanza of $43 billion of new inflation, debt, and taxes that will be on the backs of everyday, hard-working Canadians. We set 3 conditions for our support in this budget. 1, that it bring home lower prices by eliminating the inflationary carbon tax and deficits. 2, that it bring home powerful paychecks with lower taxes that reward hard work. And 3, that it bring homes that our young people can afford by removing gatekeepers to speed up building. None of these three demands have been met. All that they have delivered is more debt, more inflation, and more costs on the backs of the hardworking and beleaguered people of this country. And that is why Conservatives are proud to announce we will be voting against this inflationary stand.
Minister of Inflation.
In fact, the gross cost of all the new spending announcements in this budget works out to $4,300 for every single family in Canada. That's almost enough to house the Prime Minister in the hotel room for one night. Almost. That's how expensive this government has become. The war on work continues. The inflationary policies intensify. Canadians who are living in desperation, skipping meals, living in parents' basements, unable to drive to work, falling into depression and even considering suicide because they cannot afford the pressure and the bills that this Prime Minister has imposed after 8 long years. This budget makes all of those pressures, all of those pains, and all of those costs even worse. Ce budget rendra encore pire.
This budget will make costs, pressure, and difficulties even harder for each family. That is why we will be voting against this budget. And we will present our own approach, an approach based on common sense, Mr. Speaker. Common sense, which recognizes everyday Canadians who do their work and who pay their bills.
The people who work hard, pay their taxes, and play by the rules. We want to bring home a nation that works for the people who do the work. Bring home lower prices, bring home powerful paychecks, bring homes people can afford. It's the common sense of the common people united for our common home. Your home, my home, our home. Let's bring it home, Mr. Speaker. I now move to adjourn.
Before moving to adjourn, I just want to remind the honourable members in their speech, I know sometimes they get carried away, but some sarcastic calls of each other, and I just want to make sure that everybody respects each other.
I want to ensure that when we refer to each other, it's by the appropriate title, not by something that is fabricated and insults.
Okay, no surprise. Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre saying his party will vote against the federal budget. Quickly, key takeaways: nearly $70 billion in new spending over 6 years, offset by about $25 billion in cuts and tax savings. Canada's deficit raised to $40.1 billion next year, up from a projected $30.6 billion. And we've talked about clean tech, $80 billion in investments over the next 10 years for clean tech. I'm going to start left to right. Scott, what's missing in this budget?
Well, I mean, there's lots missing depending on what your priorities are, right?
I mean, in terms
you might
of,
say, well, where's the housing?
Right,
or,
right.
you know, so, I mean, there's all kinds of priorities. I mean, this is the challenge. You know, I can remember 20 years ago when I was working in finance and we were putting together budgets 25 years ago. And, you know, you've got Adrian saying, my God, it's ghastly. You know, taxes are going up, the deficit's going up, and it's not helping anybody. You know, Kim saying, my God, dental care is big, but not big enough. And so that's the challenge. You have to sort of figure out with the balance. Plus, you're looking not just at a cost of living crisis right now, but you're looking at the possibility of a recession. Now, she says a mild recession based on what private sector economists are saying, but we don't know. You know, it's Yahtzee, right? So, you know, I think there's lots of measures here. Again, I take away, to me, I think the most fundamental thing is that they're investing over this next decade, trying to match the United States. I think it is a play to say, you know what, we have got to be in the game of attracting these new manufacturing jobs. Otherwise, like, it's a one-time play. If we don't get them in the next handful of years, then they'll be gone and they won't come back here. They'll locate in Alabama, they'll locate in Britain, and they won't locate in Ontario and Quebec.
And that was something I was trying to point out earlier just before we had to go to Chrystia Freeland because she was tabling the budget. When President Biden was here last week, he pointed to his Inflation Reduction Act. There was conversations, of course, about this electric battery plant, Volkswagen electric battery plant in St. Thomas, Ontario. So this has been a big focus of conversation.
Can I just jump in?
Yes.
It's huge money, eh? Like, I'm hearing that this is $13 to $20 billion to attract this plant between the federal and provincial governments. Okay, so this is the kind of thing that governments haven't done for 50 years, where we say, okay, well, we're going to actually belly up with industry and spend that much money in order to ensure that roots are laid down here for these manufacturing plants. Like, it's big, big money, and we can't compete completely with the United States in it. So that's going to kick off a debate. Pierre Poilievre is going to say that's corporate welfare. Other people are going to say that's the price of remaining competitive in a new economy. It's going to be an interesting discussion, and it's going to be hyper-political.
And I'm going to say what we said during the pandemic. Canada has lots of places where we can build new manufacturing. If government can start to enable municipalities, companies, organizations to build these and build them fast, they can absolutely do it. We have a problem right now that there isn't enough domestic supply of baby formula, as an example. We saw also recently there wasn't enough supply of Tylenol, and people were going across the border like there was a drug mule situation. The reality is we could be getting back into domestic supply development. We could get back into enabling manufacturing. We're choosing not to, and governing is choosing, and budgets are about prioritization.
But I want to ask
these
you,
are the things we're not seeing in this budget.
About the consumers here in this province, we had Minister Vic Fedeli here a week or two ago when this was after this St. Thomas Volkswagen battery announcement, and I asked him about his government bringing back the EV, the electric vehicle rebate for people here in this province, which the Ford government had eliminated. And of course, he said, look, we instead put that money into creating jobs in St. Thomas. But when it comes to consumers, I mean, if I'm thinking of what I'm concerned about, if I want to buy an electric car, I would like a rebate. I mean, I think most people would. So where's the benefit to consumers in this announcement? I mean, yes, the creation of jobs, yes, long-term, this massive investment from this German automaker in St. Thomas, Ontario. But is the average person not walking around saying, hey, I'd like if you want me to contribute to, a cleaner environment, to contribute to the economy in terms of investing in an electric vehicle, I want a rebate.
You're also looking for places to plug it in at, and right now there aren't enough chargers across the province being sitting in the
That's the electrification priority here. I mean, they're talking about investing in that.
I don't know the average people that you're talking to, Christina, but the average person I know cannot afford an electric vehicle.
Actually, that's true, and there's a wait for them as well.
Regardless of
they're expensive.
of how big or small or
that's why they need the
rebate or provincial rebate. It doesn't matter.
Right.
The reality on the ground is they can't afford it. Right. And not only that, to both Kim and Scott's point, this investment by Volkswagen should not be discounted. It is massive and it's significant. And it took competing philosophical governments to come together for this very important thing. But let's not take away from the fact that even with today's investment from the feds with $80 billion, even with, add, there is no infrastructure, and we're not competitive enough yet. And I know this is a start to it. I get that. But not only can Canadians not afford it, we don't have the infrastructure. We're not prepared for it. And frankly, Canadians just can't afford it. And now we can balance that with the notion of the environment. We can balance that notion of what is doing our own part. But the reality is, until that cost of that good, that electric vehicle starts coming down, the average person is not going to be using it.
And we have programs here in Canada and Toronto. We have manufacturers who are doing really cool things in the space, including of development of charging infrastructure. But enabling them to get it out to market, getting it into municipalities, getting it into where people live, into residential areas as well as commercial.
It's not a speedy process.
But it can be, Christina. And the reality is, and I'll say this pointed to the camera, to all elected officials, start to enable these situations. This is what your constituents want. We have the abilities. Government is starting to open up the toolkit. We need to start locating them.
And Scott, I know you want to weigh in. Can I just mention, you said there's not enough charging stations. Are you scratching your head about this? This is in the budget. Hold on a second, right here. The creation of a standard USB charging port for all small handheld devices and laptops by the end of 2024.
Hallelujah, man. Hallelujah. How many freaking cords do I have?
But I
from
mean,
Amazon because I don't on the right port.
well,
that's a good consumer,
That's
investment.
a good
There you go.
because, right, you always have to buy a new new cable for a new phone.
That's an eye-level investment.
But this is not a priority.
I don't know. It's a fair-sized priority in my house.
I was going to say, yes, it depends on who you ask. But when we talk about things like electric vehicles, I mean, you can't just drive down the street and be like, let me stop my car right now and charge my electric vehicle either.
But that's literally what these $80 billion are. I mean, electrification is not going to happen overnight, but, they're really trying to goose it. You can spend billions of dollars giving people rebates for an electric vehicle that is going to be built, in North Carolina and, delay all of that, driving down the price. Or you can invest in the manufacturing happen here. We create jobs. We drive down the price because it becomes more ubiquitous, the electric vehicles. And we get all the economic benefits, not just for years, but for decades. But what I'm saying is, it's a lot of money. $80 billion, this is the start. If you think this is big cash, check in 5 years from now. We're going to say $80 billion. Those were the days. We're going to be doubling that for sure.
I want to ask you guys about a couple other measures here in the budget. We knew about this because it was previously discussed or announced. A new pregnancy loss leave for federally regulated workers who suffer miscarriage. That would protect the jobs of working parents after the loss of a child, including if it comes in the course of an adoption or surrogacy. I remember when I saw that story come out, I thought, this would appeal to Canadians, but then I realized it's for federally regulated workers. Why do you think the federal government didn't expand this program to people across the country?
They can't. They only, as we saw during the pandemic, they only have the ability to regulate their own employees and their own employee level of government. Then the provinces and others can start to chime in, and hopefully this becomes a normal conversation. And what we've seen in the last few years, as more and more people are talking about pregnancy loss, it's a hard conversation to have. It's an embarrassing conversation to have. It is one that is fraught, whether it happened to you, your loved ones, your partner, the people you're trying to work with on an adoption. I applaud the federal government to do this, and it's a good starting of a conversation that needed to be had. And the more that we can start to normalize those conversations, the better it is for those who have suffered those losses.
Thank you for that. Also, there's something that would appeal to families as well, keeping on the topic of families. This was something that was hinted at before the budget was tabled. How much families can withdraw tax-free from a registered education savings plan, from $5,000 to $8,000 for full-time students, and from $2,500 to $4,000 for part-time students. So that's a positive.
Yeah, for those families across Canada that can afford to put in savings for their children's post-secondary institution, whatever it may be, college, university, university, whatever it is, that extra bit helps. But it really seems to me that the cost of post-secondary is going up, so it's almost covering off whatever inflationary costs there are to send a student to that institution. But it's important that they recognize that without penalizing Canadians for withdrawing it on the other side.
We have a few minutes left here. I want to get final thoughts from the three of you, and I'm just thinking of people in the GTA, which is, of course, the focus of our programming. I'll start here. I'm trying to look at the screen left to right.
I'm down at the end. I'm the dude.
Scott, I mean, are you disappointed when you take a look at? I try and think of people walking around this city who are thinking of what's in this for them. Should they be disappointed?
I don't think so. Look, I mean, if we're looking for the budget to solve all of our daily ills, I think we've got sort of weird priorities. First of all, I just want to start by saying that the price of beer will not go up as much as I thought it was going to on April 1st. So that's a pleasing thing. That registers loudly in my household, at least. But no, I think, there are some affordability measures for those who need it most. There's a lot of investment, as we mentioned, in terms of sort of, if we can call it sort of future manufacturing, trying to repatriate a bunch of, plants, like the kind of plants that my mom and dad worked at for years and years. So that's a good thing. But, it's never going to be enough, and it's always going to be too much that you spend. I mean, that's just a reality. I did 6, 7 budgets with Paul Martin back in the 90s, and it's always the same thing. You have to balance these priorities and, ask 11 people and you got 12 opinions.
And we got 30 seconds left, so 10 seconds each. I'm sorry about that. We're coming up to, no, not at all. So we're coming up to our 5 p.m. show. 30 seconds each, actually, I'm told, for each of you. You satisfied, Kim?
Look, I would have liked to have seen more investment in municipalities, direct funding to them, a comprehensive layout of what we can do for transit, transportation, unlocking affordable housing and purpose-built rentals. Are there a lot of things I can get behind in this budget? Absolutely. Am I loving all of it? Absolutely not. But I think on balance, it's as balanced as you're going to get.
And Adrian Batra, editor-in-chief of the Toronto Sun, what is the cover of the paper tomorrow? What's the message?
Oh, that's a great question. If you give me a few minutes, I'll send it to you and you can show it to all your CP24 viewers. That would be great.
We, of course, know the Conservatives, as expected, we're not going to support this. There's
well, it'd be weird if they did. I mean, that would be one thing.
I always find it baffling when they say that, too, as if you would expect them in some imaginary land to say, yeah, we're going to back this.
I think that the overall takeaway is this is a big spending, big government budget, which is in keeping with how the Liberals have governed for the last 8 years.
Okay, we have 10 seconds left. I just want to thank you, Adrian, Kim, Scott. Thank you so much for being our panel. Always.